This week on Book Talk, my guest is Dr. Dan Wile. We're taping this show from his home in Oakland, California. This is part two of a two-part exploration of his book, After the Honeymoon, How Conflict Can Improve Your Relationship. In part one, we explored the implication of the book for couples. In part two, this part, we're going to explore what the book tells us about the work of a therapist in trying to help couples achieve greater intimacy. Dr. Wile, welcome back. Glad you're here. Throughout the book, you give an example of ways a counselor feels and thinks about their work, and that's basically your own perspective. One of the issues you raise has to do with empathizing with the least likable partner. I guess it's a sort of a counter-transference kind of issue. Can you talk a little bit more about why you think it's important for a therapist to monitor their own reactions as they're working with a couple?
Well, the therapist, being a human being also, is reacting to the behavior of the two partners. And very often there's one partner that outsiders, and the therapist, as an outsider, would react to more than the other. And when the therapist is reacting, he, she is very much like the partners themselves, where they can't really listen well, and they can't be empathic. So that I pay real attention to how, when I'm seeing partners, am I siding against one? And if so, that's the one that I'm not understanding well enough, and that's the one that's doing the poorer job saying how he or she feels, but that means that it's particularly my job to do that. So I'm paying attention, rather than just reacting and lecturing that person, always a danger. I'm paying attention to how I feel like lecturing, and then change that into looking at, well, how can I get behind that person better? How can I make more sense of what that person is doing? How can I find the hidden truth in what the person is saying? How can I find the soft underbelly feeling that the person is not quite able to get at, and instead is coming on in this strong, harsh way? And asking myself that question, what is that person's inner struggle, often allows me suddenly to regain my empathy and be able to speak on that person's side.
You know, throughout the book, you seem to be talking and taking a fairly less pathologizing kind of view of couples and their work. And it almost has that sort of positive psychology kind of look and feel to it as I'm reading it. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, and my theory leads me to it. Okay. So if somebody is angry, arrogant, and so on, I'm not thinking of character structure and this is narcissistic and all that stuff. I'm thinking, well, this is a fallback measure that this person is using because he can't say what he really does need to say at that moment. He can't talk about his fear. He can't talk about his wish. Can't talk about his hurt, his disappointment. And he just snaps into anger, which is what we all do when we can't get a hold of the soft underbelly feeling.
Okay. Throughout the book, you talk about this idea of therapist as a consultant, a person who kind of like manages the therapy with the client. The idea is an issue in which it seems to me that you're really talking about greater transparency. It's fairly postmodern in its thinking. Could you talk more about why you think this stance makes really good sense as you're doing work with couples?
Well, in talking with them about what I'm feeling, talking with the partners about what I'm feeling, and bringing the partners in on the struggles I'm having in the therapy, or questions I have, such as, I'm not sure what we should talk about now, whether we should continue what we're talking about, or whether we should bring up that unresolved thing from last week, or whether there's something entirely different that you want to bring out. We only have a few 20 minutes left. Is there anything else? Or whether we were doing just fine talking the way we are. Well, it's a great relief to not have to just unilaterally make a decision like that, but to bring them in on it. And it's also a great relief to be able to bring them in on my feelings, so that I would be doing with them what I'd be hoping they would do with each other, which is, expressing what's going on in my mind, expressing what's going on in their mind to each other, and where you just automatically have a kind of a close feeling. Now, it's tricky with what's on your mind is anger and resentment. That's another story. So you have to, you may not want to say all of that in its bold form, but so that it's disarming to clients if you say pretty much what's going on in your mind.
So you really end up reducing a lot of the defensiveness.
Yeah.
That a lot of couples come in with.
Yeah.
Another thought that comes to my mind is the place of theory and models in your work. As I read it, you really believe that a whole bunch of models and theories can be accommodated using your approach. Am I correct in that?
Well, there's a certain thrust to my, or center to my theory that most other couple therapists agree with, I think, which is that couples suffer from withdrawal and from fighting and from not being able to talk in an intimate way. So there's a central idea that I think all therapists agree with, which is that couples withdraw and they fight rather than having intimate conversations. And we're all trying to get them to have intimate conversations. So that's the part that I think everyone agrees with. The part that there's a disagreement with is whether you focus on problem solving and a certain kind of theories about defenses and resistance.
Or communication skills, or which other kind of approach you take to all that. Toward the end of the book, you talk about the use of fantasy in working with couples, and one of the thoughts I had is that could really backfire on you if you're not too careful. That is, the couple could, really feel like they weren't being supportive when you're working with them. Could you kind of explain to me how you see, working with fantasy in a way that doesn't minimize the reality of the couple, and making sure that the couple's adequately supported?
Well, I was talking mostly about what partners do with one another, rather than what I would do as a therapist. So that though there is one example where, as a therapist, I would do it, and it'd be benign fantasy. But there's a way in which, if you bring people into your fantasy, your partner into your fantasies and wishes, that can, be an intimate act. But you got to be careful. Some fantasies are just provocative and make the other person feel left out or angry or misunderstood. So it's not something that I would, that I push. Now, the things I do push would be what John Gottman would call the dream. And so if couples are fighting, what I might do is talk about what Gottman calls the dream behind their position. So I might say something like, I got the feeling that throughout your whole life, in anticipating your marriage and your relationship, there's a picture you had of how you wanted to go that involved a lot of intimacy, a lot of closeness, a lot of confiding, and you're finding that's not happening in this, and it's hard to give up. So I'm saying something more gently than they do, that they're making accusations. Okay. And then I talk about the other person's fantasy. Well, I had the fantasy that I'd have a wife who was happy with me and just sort of loved me for who I was, rather than missing something in me and wanting something different. And I'm not having that fantasy satisfied. I hope you can see why I have trouble with that. So I try to bring out a conversation like that, or have it for them.
Right. Great examples. When you put your head on the pillow at the end of a night and you think about the impact of after the honeymoon on counselors, therapists, and couples, What sort of comes to your mind?
Oh, well, there's some general philosophies in it that I'm hoping will have some effect somewhere. And the general philosophy is, and I get this from my mentor, Bernard Affelbaum, there is an ease or a quickness in which people can judge themselves and judge one another, slip into kind of a critical mode, and I'm wanting to show how when that happens, there is the soft underbelly feeling that's gotten lost. That that's the fallback measure, becoming critical or so on, that you go on. So I wanted to challenge a lot of the views that people had, and that's where I would be challenging views like you have to solve all your problems before you can have a good relationship, or you've got to stop being able to take care of yourself and stop being so dependent. There's these
Some of those myths about,
and
what it means to be
these terms that kind of make someone feel awful, and that we use on ourselves and each other. And I wanted to show there's another way of approaching those things, to have people notice the poisonous effect of those things and to see their alternative.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Wile. This week on Book Talk, we've had an opportunity to talk with Dr. Dan Wile about his book, After the Honeymoon. Hope you've enjoyed our sessions together. This has been a two-part series. Part one, we took a look at his book as it relates to couples and their own intimacy issues. And in part two, we took a look at what's the function in the relationship a counselor or therapist has as they think about the work of working with couples. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Richard Long.